Now, in order to think about it and form a view of this question and defend it, it's important to step back and look at the context for our relationship with Pakistan. So, going back to before the attacks of September 11th, 2001, Pakistan was one of the only 3 countries that recognized the legitimacy of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. Now, it went much further than that. They were closely allied with the Taliban. They helped them rise to power. They helped protect them. The Pakistani regime for a long time was a sponsor, in effect, of a regime that was host to the Al-Qaeda groups that hatched the attack on September 11th. Now, that relationship continued through 2001, and it only changed, or at least ostensibly changed, when the United States went to Pakistan and said, you need to make a choice. Either you're on the side of the free nations of the world, the United States, as the victim, or you're on the side of the attacker, the aggressor, the Taliban and its Al-Qaeda affiliates. Allegedly, the Pakistani regime took our side, and as a result, the United States entered into a bargain with the Pakistanis where we gave them a lot of money, billions of dollars, in the name of enabling them to combat our common enemy. Now, at the time, that deal was dubious on its face, and in the time since then, we've got mounting evidence that the Pakistani regime was duplicitous. It took the money, it did just enough to show us that it was responsible for responding to the Islamists on its borders in Afghanistan, in the tribal region, but it didn't do any more than it had to keep the money flowing. And at the same time, it was actively supporting Al-Qaeda and Taliban fighters. And that went on, and so the alliance that we formed in 2001 was corrupt from the beginning. And that alliance has been betrayed by Pakistan throughout the last 11 years. Now, that all is context for understanding where we are today and what our options are in terms of the relationship. Now, to bring some principles to bear here now, coming at this from the ideas of Ayn Rand and her philosophic system of objectivism, there are certain principles that apply in foreign policy that are really crucial in understanding and forming a view of this situation. The most significant one I would name is the principle of justice. Now, justice we hear commonly referred to in legal context, in relationships and so on, and she thought that it's obviously all of those things, but it has broader application. It's an indispensable guide to action, not just in our relationships with people, not just in our relationships with criminals and in legal, judicial context. So what is justice for her? It means you judge objectively the character and actions of another person if in a relationship, and then you treat them accordingly. Now that means there's a lot of work to be done to gather the data, to assess it, to understand its implications, piece it together into a whole, and then decide what is the appropriate response. Now, that has to carry over, on her view, into policy, and specifically into foreign policy, the kind of relationships we have with other nations. When you decide to form an alliance, as we did with Pakistan, it is crucial to be as rigorously objective, as scientifically factual and detailed about your assessment of the regime as you would in any legal case where you have to decide guilt or innocence. Here we're deciding friend or foe, or somewhere in between, but we have to decide where in between they are. And wherever you whatever conclusion you reach about the regime, then you have to decide, given its character, what is an appropriate relationship. Now, I think that our policy in the last 10 years has failed to judge Pakistan objectively. Evidence for that is in the fact that Pakistan has been continuing its support of Islamist fighters who are hostile to our interests while lying to us and continuing to sell nuclear secrets and support other nations that are hostile to us. All that's been going on while we've pretended that it is, in fact, a major non-NATO ally, which is a high designation for our alliances with other nations. So the relevant principle here is the principle of how we judge other regimes. Now, given what we know about Pakistan, there's no evidence to think they're on our side. They're actually hostile in the sense that they resist our attempts to crush the Islamists on its borders, within its borders, and within Afghanistan. And they've gone further to the extent that our troops have come up to the border of Pakistan, for example. Pakistani troops have fired on American aircraft and fired on American troops. That's not what you would expect from an ally. You would not expect our ally to be giving shelter and arms and support and turning a blind eye to our enemies. And the most significant and I think telling example illustrating the way in which this relationship is unhealthy and corrupt and morally dubious, to put it mildly, is what we discovered in May of 2011, or at least those of us who don't have security clearance just read the newspaper, which is that the leader of the Al-Qaeda forces, Osama bin Laden, was holed up in a mansion in Abbottabad in Pakistan, yards away from a military school. So that on the face of it is enough to say, really? Our ally has one of our most wanted targets living within its borders? That is dubious. Now, you add up all of the concrete examples of Pakistan's duplicity over a protracted period of time, its active subversion of our attempts to combat the enemy, and then you piece that together and you say, did they really come to our side, 2001, or did they take our money and our aid and support and just tell us a story that kept us at arm's length enough for them to carry out what they wanted to do, which is to go off and mount troops on the Kashmir border with India? The final point here is, as the resolution calls, should we suspend assistance? I think that's a legitimate tool, it's an appropriate response, but it's probably too little. It's probably too little at this point, given the extent to which Pakistan has betrayed its relationship with us, has actively supported regimes and individuals and groups and movements, ideological movements, that are hostile to us. So I think that it is a minimum tool that we should consider using if we think it's effective. But at this point, that's a real question. Should we be doing something even more coercive than pulling back on our flow of aid to Pakistan? So I think the key points here are to understand what is the factual context, the history for the relationship, how we should be judging it, given that the relevant principle, or the most relevant, is the principle of justice, where you have to judge objectively based on the facts, not just based on convenience or wishful thinking, which I think was an active component of our policy. And finally, given the judgment, how do you respond? And I think our response to Pakistan right now is to declare that they are no longer an ally. Nothing they've done has demonstrated their loyalty to us. They've done much to demonstrate their disloyalty. It's up to them to repair the relationship, if that's even possible. And so, given the role of the principle of justice, you have to say, this is a minimum tool we should be able to use to stop funding a regime that is demonstrably against our interests. It's acting to subvert our security and to strengthen those who are against us. So I think when you bring in Ayn Rand's ideas, and particularly her moral ideas, to thinking about public policy and foreign policy in particular, you see that it brings clarity and the ability to tease apart complicated relationships like this and lead you to some viable options. And the final thing I would recommend is to look at the Ayn Rand lexicon, both under the entry of justice, the principle I've been talking about, and then the other related concepts in the ethical theory of objectivism, Ayn Rand's philosophy.